Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This week we talk all about the house wren, a tiny little bird that acts much tougher than it looks and has one of the widest distributions of any bird native to the Americas. It has a beautiful call, one you've probably heard before, and does some really cool things like adding spider eggs to their nests, which results in controlling the mites and parasites that have been collecting. So many interesting things about the house wren. John, Shannon, Amanda, and I had fun with this one. Okay, go grab your binoculars and let's get into it. All right, well, welcome back, everyone, to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This is RJ, and I'm with John, Shannon, and Amanda. And this week we're talking about the house wren. But before we get into that, did we want to talk about, is there something new going on at the Field Museum?
No, nothing.
No?
Nothing at all.
Nothing small, nothing old, nothing fossilized.
Nothing with feathers. Nothing like the first, what people often consider the first bird. So Chicago has the Chicago Archaeopteryx, and it was announced very recently. And the specimen is awesome. It's right now, you can go to the museum and you can see it. It'll eventually have some bigger exhibition around it. But the specimen is beautiful. It might be the most complete one, the best prepared one, because it was prepared not by people who wanted to sell it, but by people who wanted to preserve every bit of it for science, not adding bits and pieces of bones that aren't really there. So it's really pretty spectacular, even down to seeing how many vertebrae there are in the tail, which was unknown before the Field Museum people started looking at the new specimen. So it's the 13th one. There are 12 elsewhere. I think all of them are from Germany. Now there's so many, we should see if we can have Jingmei on to talk about this bird, but there's so many things you can know now about Archaeopteryx, not just how old it is, 140 to 150 million years old. I mean, that's old. That's way older than the extinction of the dinosaurs. It's older than lineages of modern birds. But we know what modern birds look like, and so what we can do is estimate what this bird did. So it clearly flew. It has feathers that are like modern birds with asymmetrical veins. So if you look at the flight feather of a modern bird, the center part of it isn't in the center. It's offset a bit, and that helps you form an airfoil as a wing. So you wouldn't need that if you weren't flying. And in fact, previous dinosaur feathers don't have that. So that's how we know that they're likely not flying, because feathers can be used for a lot of things. They can be used for display. They can be used for warmth. But obviously in birds, in the lineages leading up to birds, they were used for flight. So they have very specific characteristics of flighted birds.
So is this the first, so it was the first bird. Is it also the first animal to fly?
Yeah,
so
no. these are completely, because there were pteranodons that I think probably
and
predate
insects.
them.
Lots and lots of insects.
Lots of insects,
okay.
Right.
Okay.
But at the base of that tree, with all this diversification eventually leading to modern birds. And so that's why it's so fascinating to scientists. And the specimen itself is actually surprisingly small.
Yeah, it's like a bird in that sense. When you look at the skeleton of a bird, birds are way smaller than you think they are. If you think of an owl being pretty big, but if I showed you an owl skeleton, you'd be like, what? That's probably a screech owl. And you're like, no, that's a great gray owl. They just look so tiny once you strip all the feathers off.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it is surprisingly small.
Right, but it's definitely got traits that are more dinosaur-like than they are modern bird-like. Yeah. But it's got hollow bones, which is
it's got
one
vertebrae
of the
all the way in
flight.
its tail, which modern birds don't have. It has teeth.
Yeah.
It seems to not have a feathered head, at least as far as looking at feather tracks do. But the cool thing about what we know about modern birds now, the inside of feathers, there are fossils that you can use scanning electron microscopy at, and you can see that the melanosomes inside of the feathers, because some some specimens are preserved well enough that you can see that, and you can infer what it might be, and that it looks like these birds were black, maybe not completely black. And if you look at the artist rendition of the Chicago specimen of Archaeopteryx, you'll see that it has some white on it as well as black, because those are common colors that are in birds now that are in habitats that, like the Archaeopteryx was thought to be in.
I always say they should do a whole exhibit pulling together all the ways in which Archaeopteryx has been depicted by people, just because nobody had any idea necessarily what it looked like, and so you had complete freedom to kind of say, here it is. And we're starting to get a little away from that, which is just kind of amazing to me.
That is amazing.
So it's really cool. People should come to the museum and see it for sure.
Cool. And do we know how long it's going to be in Chicago?
It's a permanent.
Just permanent.
That's
I
exciting.
mean, how these things happen are really interesting tales that are really specific to fossils. So if you're a museum and you want a fossil like that and you want to preserve it for science, you have to be very stealth about purchasing it, because a lot of wealthy people who are collectors, fossil collectors, would come in and outbid someone like us, and then that specimen would be off of the scientific market and in someone's very fancy home. So, and that's happened plenty of times to fossils. So in order to preserve it, it was like that with Sue the dinosaur too. In order to preserve it, you have to be sneaky about buying it, or they'll bid you out. It wouldn't be too hard to outbid a museum. We're not exactly rolling in dough, but there's always these elements of surprise. And then because of the scientific publishing process, we've been sworn to secrecy for this for a long time. A couple of years this bird's been in the museum. And when you publish things, you can't leak information that you're finding, because then the actual scientific publication isn't publishable anymore. Journals won't publish it because, hey, you published this in the Chicago Tribune, or someone published this in a note in some other obscure place, and so you have to keep it really quiet. And it takes a long time to really do this justice, to describe it with the amount of detail that it deserves. It takes a long time to prepare it. It was prepared I love this part of the story. It was prepared by two women in the museum, and its story is being told by them and by the female curator of dinosaurs. So that is people with very careful hands doing that. You can come in the museum and there's a fossil prep lab where you can take a look at how painstaking it is to separate the important parts of the animal from the rock that's surrounding it. And it takes a lot of expertise, a lot of patience, and a lot of skill. And that was not always applied to the other Archaeopteryx. That, times change. Our abilities to do things change too.
Well, and the motivations change. So, again, as Shannon said earlier, the motivation here was to prep this specimen for science. And once you see it, you can understand when the experts will say, if you're prepping just for putting it up on a wall in your home, you're not really caring about necessarily the scientific value of it.
Yeah, if you lose a bone in the tail, not that big of a deal. Someone's still going to pay you a whole bunch of money to have it. And you probably aren't getting the most experienced preparators when that happens. Because if it's not designed, if you're not prepping it with the design to science, your motivations, like John just said, are really different. So if you want to get the most money from it, maybe you'll go take pictures of the other Archaeopteryx and fill in what's missing in yours not with the fossil, but with interpretations of that. And even then you try to make it look like it was actually there, but there are tools, imaging tools you can use to see that this is not fossil material anymore. So there's lots of things like that.
Wow, so somebody would try to fill it in and get away with acting like that was...
Sure. Sensibilities have changed, too, about these things. And Sue has taught us how important it is to have
You mean the T-Rex?
The T-Rex, yeah. Has taught us how important it is to have careful preparation where you look through the whole rock. From a science perspective, you can see some parts of Sue's skeleton that if you weren't looking at it scientifically, you might not care about, the bottom of the rib cage, for example, all those little bones that were dug out of the rock after the main part of Sue was out. And the same is true for this. There are parts of this new Archaeopteryx that are painstakingly looked for because the scientific expertise is there to know what to look for and to care about finding every bit of it that's possible. So it's really cool.
Cool. We need to make it down there. I'm excited.
It could actually enter into the next round robin we have.
Archaeopteryx.
That's fair. I mean, I didn't know it had been announced, and I was on some meeting, and all of a sudden I kept getting text after text after text. I'm like, what on earth is happening? And I looked down eventually, and it was a whole bunch of people, ornithologists, nerdy ornithologists, texting. How do you know? Well, and it had been announced while we were on this call.
Awesome.
All right. Well, should we get into our house wren then?
Sure.
Yeah, let's get even smaller.
Even smaller. So, John, you've been wanting to do house wren for a while now. So we weren't super familiar with them. We've heard them on Merlin plenty, but I don't think we've seen one on our own this year. We keep getting close and we can hear them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's a neat bird in that respect. So house wren is a member of the Troglodytidae, which is, Shannon's probably got the derivation of that.
Well, troglodyte, underground.
Yeah, underground. So they're kind of skulking birds, and I think that's...
And they nest in holes.
And they can nest in holes, and it's a mostly New World family. There's one species that gets to Europe, and house wren is kind of a incredible thing in terms of its distribution, in the sense that there are things that have been called house wrens all the way from Canada down to Terra del Fuego.
So it has one of, if not the largest distribution of any songbirds in the world.
With the caveat being that they've started splitting up those. We don't know what a species of them is.
Okay.
And we definitely don't know what a subspecies of them is.
Okay.
But
my personal biases coming out.
What you guys have said you experienced is something I like about them, which is that even though they're these little brown birds with bars, so they're in a
they're
little
nondescript in how you look.
Yeah, insectivorous bird.
Yeah.
Their song is something that it's worth knowing, because once you know it, you can hear it an awful long ways off sometimes. And they just sing constantly. The males, when they're setting up territories in the breeding season, are just blowing out this fast jumble of notes just over and over again.
It kind of drove us a little nuts, like the not being able to see it.
Yes.
There's been a couple times where we've been,
Yes.
we have Merlin open and we're like, oh my gosh, and it's picking it up and it's like that and like one other bird, and we're like, all right, this has to be nearby.
Yeah. And the other day, RJ was at work and I screenshotted my Merlin, and there was a house wren, a house finch, and a house sparrow.
We got the
And those are three.
trifecta.
Yeah, exactly. And I was wondering why are they called, each of all those, why are they called house?
So I think kind of for different reasons. That's an interesting question. House sparrows, I think, are so tied to humans that I think that's part of it. House finches, maybe kind of similarly.
Okay.
What about house wrens?
Nest boxes would be my guess.
Okay.
So they actually,
Okay.
So they build a nest, but they build it inside a cavity.
Oh, okay.
And we had an experience with one. We had a ceramic
Of course, it's pink because of
Yeah,
course
it
it
was
is.
a thing that we had hanging out for a long time.
John told me nothing would ever go in it.
And again,
it's pink.
It's a fun bird to watch in the spring because, the males are singing, and if they get a female, they kind of take the female around and show the female nest sites.
Oh.
And then she decides what she likes. And we had one year where they nested in this ceramic thing, and I got photographs of it. Was almost hilarious to watch the size of sticks that they would try to bring into this hole.
So cute.
And they're incredibly pugnacious birds with respect to other hole nesting birds like this.
I shouldn't even tell people how many mornings I spent staring at that pink birdhouse, waiting for the babies to come out. Because eventually if they're not nesting, because it's been tried plenty of times in that house, but that one was clearly took. So, and I had to see the babies come out. So sitting there for hours. Are you coming to the museum? No, I haven't seen my baby house wrens yet, so no, I'm not. I'm going to sit here and wait until they come out. And you can't make me. This is part of my job.
That's so cute.
And eventually they did?
Yeah.
You saw. That's so sweet.
It sounds like they're pretty aggressive as far
They
as
are.
yeah.
They are brutal, actually, in their aggression, including killing things that are a lot bigger than them. If you get in the way of their territories, they are. They don't take. They take no prisoners.
So there are these other species that you see, that people set up nest boxes for, like tree swallows and eastern bluebirds, and nest boxes are perfectly attractive to house wrens too. And I remember watching a house wren that I heard singing, and I walked over and it was kind of sitting on this fence and singing, and there was a nest box with the head of a tree swallow sticking out of it, and all I could think of was that tree swallow is probably sitting there going, I cannot leave because I may actually lose this if I do.
Yeah, it'll come and clean your nest out and just stare at you, this little tiny bird.
And it sounds like they'll be aggressive even with other house wrens that are pairing up, that they'll go into a nest that's already and kick the male out.
That's right.
Wow. That's a bummer.
I know.
Don't mess with hormones.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing I didn't think about, and I don't know why I didn't think about this when I was doing research before this episode, is there are so many papers that have been published on this bird. We may know more about this bird than any other bird, certainly in North America. More than 700 papers, like a lot more than 700 papers published. Those are real science papers, not a note that might be in Audubon magazine or something like that. So these are actual scientific papers. They've been, all kinds of things have been that we know now about house wrens, including things I just never thought about before, that the daylight and temperature competition for where birds can nest, and how that is changing with global warming, because daylight is good, cold temperatures are not. So there's always this balance of how hot is it going to get, because that'll kill eggs, and how cold is it going to get at night. And they know a lot about that and how that affects. I mean, we don't know that about any other bird. So not Kirtland's warblers. We don't know those kinds of things about it. So I was just astonished at the amount of research that's been done.
So a lot of that is just how tractable their biology is. So in other words, they'll use nest boxes, so you can set nest boxes up for them. You can then follow the breeding biology of the bird. Because they're coming, those nest boxes are off in the open, you can put cameras up and you can measure feeding rates. You can open the tops of the boxes and you can actually grab the chicks and measure them as they're going along, so that you can get data on how well they're being fed and what their growth rates are. I mean, it's just
they live so close to humans that you don't have to, you can get larger sample sizes than you could for other birds without going into the middle of nowhere to do it.
They're not up in the canopy. so you can work at ground height with them. I mean, it's a interesting bird in that sense.
And then do they migrate, or are they resident?
So it, again, this gets back to Shannon's point early on about what a house wren is. So the ones here definitely are not here in the winter.
Okay.
And they winter down in the southern U.S. and South Texas and Louisiana and places. But then there's this set of house wren populations that are essentially related in the mountains of southern Arizona going down into Mexico. And when you get into South America, there's a taxon called southern house wren now that's literally out on the cutover areas throughout the Amazon basin. And
wow.
I was always amazed because when I was working in central Amazonia, you could basically, somebody cleared forest in the middle of the forest. There was a reasonable chance that a house wren would find that within a breeding season. And the reason for it is they've learned to follow the roads. So they probably weren't in Amazonia very extensively historically. But as these little cutover areas have spread out across a lot of parts of the Amazon, these birds get there and do just fine. There's lots to eat. But so those birds aren't migratory.
Oh, okay.
They're completely, they're there year round. And
So there's some places where you have both migratory and non-migratory individuals again. So pretty interesting. They also do other really cute things.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say real quickly that family is largely, again, it's a New World family, and many of them are tropical. So there aren't very many migratory wrens. There are things like sedge wren and marsh wren here, but most of them aren't migratory.
Other members of the family have, even though house wrens sing a lot and make a lot of noise, a lot, there are other members of that family whose songs are just ethereal. They're so amazingly beautiful. And luckily, there's databases with these recordings in them, and you can go and take a look and listen to their sounds. It's a really...
Yeah, my favorite one like that is musician wren, which song wren, which I think I got the common name right, Cypherinus errata. And it when you hear it in Amazonia, it literally sounds like there's somebody whistling off the trail someplace. Oh, wow. This is really cool.
Yeah, but they're mostly pretty drab until they open their mouths, and then they're not drab at all. They speak very loudly when they open their mouths.
I saw a description of their call as being effervescent, which I thought was an interesting way to describe it. Yeah. And if you heard a house wren in the Amazon, if you heard a bird calling in the Amazon basin and it was a house wren, you would recognize it as being similar to what you hear up here.
But if you looked at its sonogram or listened to it closely, there are differences, but it still has the essence of
the effervescence.
Effervescence, yeah.
Perfect. I mean, again, they're just, for a little brown bird, they have a ton of character, and I really admire that.
I just think they're adorable. Not quite as adorable as creeper.
I was going to say as a brown creeper.
No, not quite, but they're pretty amazing.
We've just been talking about them going in and pecking other birds' eggs and doing things like that.
There's something about the way brown creepers move.
Your idea of adorable is...
Well, maybe.
It's the one that picked the pink house.
There we go.
Yeah, that's when it won, Shannon.
Once.
No, it tried many times, but it succeeded once. And now we haven't seen it. We haven't seen one even go in there in a while.
I've been really bummed.
They need to get a better house.
It's like you describe in your neighborhood. You'll hear them, and every once in a while they'll come in. And actually, one of the things in COVID was really interesting with respect to this is you'd hear them, and then during COVID there was clearly a family that had fledged young. And once the young had fledged, they start moving around a little more. And so suddenly they started coming in the yard, and I could see the adults feeding them on the trees and stuff. And my favorite thing was this one that I think several of the older birds had fledged the nest, and there was one younger one, and it kind of flew across the road a little bit and just dropped in the middle of the road and just sat there for a second and trying to figure out what to do. And eventually it flew off and joined the parents.
That's why so many people love birds since the pandemic, right? Because you can see them anywhere, you can experience them anywhere, including you can have amazing stories in your own yard. And when you're sitting at home all the time, you can't just stare at your computer screen and breathe internal air or be afraid of the air of other people, which was a justifiable and still is a justifiable fear. So you could go outside and be amazed at your own yard.
One of the interesting things I saw was about their nests when they become infested with mites. Is that they'll...
Well, they put spiders. They put spider cocoons or whatever they're called in their nests, and the spider babies come out and eat the parasites like the mites and other thing that are in there.
That's so cool.
Genius.
So coming back to that pink one, I have a story about something like that, because they'll put lots of things in their nest. And I came home from work one day and I came around the corner of the house where the nest was, and one of the adults was hanging upside down by what seemed like a spider thread. That had gotten around its foot somehow, and it was just hanging there. And I'll be honest, I grabbed the camera and took a picture, and then I started walking towards it to get it out. And as soon as it started flying, it finally broke away. And so but it was just like there are hazards to playing around with spider.
Sure.
That is
webs and stuff.
crazy.
Yeah, no, it was so
crazy.
funny.
That is
But
awesome.
because this bird is so well studied, they have nests in lab conditions where they can put the spider eggs in the nest and see that they do indeed eat the mites that are in there. So there is a reason. You don't necessarily have to have a reason, or it could be because female house wrens like white or like round things or whatever, but they can show now that it actually has a purpose.
Wow.
That is
which
cool.
is pretty cool.
It's
very cool.
amazing.
Yeah.
They're tiny. They weigh the 2 quarters. That's what their weight is. It's the weight of a couple quarters.
And they'll kill like larger birds when they're that tiny
Absolutely.
of a bird. That's just wild. I saw something too that was interesting. Just that, and this might be common with other birds, but I found this pretty interesting for the house wren, that the males, when they're young, will like follow other males and observe them and watch the other ones nest to kind of like observe and learn how to do it until they get confident enough to do that on their own.
This again, we were talking about some of this. I would imagine that's actually things like that may be more prevalent in birds than we actually know. And coming back to Shannon's comment about how well studied they are,
They're by people.
They can color band them. That's probably how that was figured out. And you think about it again. It's like, how's a young bird like that supposed to figure out what the heck it's supposed to do?
Yeah.
Observation would be the most logical way. And so, but again, how tractable is it to convince yourself that that's actually what you're seeing?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's really neat.
Yeah.
There were 31 subspecies of that bird
Wow.
that have been named. 31.
Your favorite thing? Is that's
No, it's not my favorite thing.
That's
It's a
30 too
taxonomic-
many.
It's a taxonomic annoyance is what it is. But there's again, because they're really well studied, we know things about some of these ecogeographic rules, I'm putting quotes, about them. So ones that live in the Pacific Northwest are darker. So if you're in a forest that's humid and dark and damp, then the trend is that birds get darker in those. And if you're in a more arid environment, the birds get lighter, and house wrens do that. So, there's just a lot of things you can learn about them.
Well, I think we are getting kind of close on time. Is there anything else on house wrens we want to chat about before we
No,
wrap
just
this up?
listen for them in your neighborhood because there's a reasonable chance there's one around somewhere.
Yeah, we're going to see one
Yeah,
eventually.
we will
I'm
see
kind of
one.
embarrassed that we haven't.
Well, like I said, I mean, again, they're fun to watch once
Yeah.
you see them, and again, they can be really hard to. They're tiny little birds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but I think another reason why they're so well studied is because they have a lot of personality, and so it's fun to watch them.
Yeah.
Well, we also now we'll get into things that aren't so that make people uncomfortable. There's a lot of extra pair fertilizations in this bird, and again, because they're so well studied and they're so easy to see and capture with DNA technologies, we now know that.
My thought on that is, as we've been able to prove that many birds have extra pair paternity rates of something like 30 to 40% sometimes, I always find it most interesting that in spite of that, you haven't had the loss of male-female pairings. And I think the reason for that is that there's still plenty of times where it's beneficial to, I mean, the pair bonds, you still have a chance of siring enough young for the next generation.
Okay, except they re-nest very frequently, and often the second nesting is not with the first partner.
Oh, okay.
So there's polygamy going on.
Oh, okay.
And the second nesting often has more extra pair fertilizations
So I
than
guess-
the first one. So
I guess the question there is
more cheating
that
going
the
on.
secret of their success?
I don't know. Well, certainly re-nesting is an important secret of success.
Yeah.
You know, if you can effectively raise more than one brood without sacrificing your own lifespan, then, you know, good on you.
Well, and you know, if you're a little brown bird, like you guys have noticed, you can be hard to see.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's another advantage that they have over a lot of other warblers and things like
for
that.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I wonder if
So
we've been
I also
looking.
got confused about interested in what wren meant.
Oh, us too.
Like
what does that mean?
What that word actually meant. So it's a Middle English in origin, but spiritually it means determination, enthusiasm, change, and happiness. So this does not surprise me that those kinds of labels would be applied to wrens.
So there's such a weird irony here to me because obviously Western European thought dominates the bird world with respect to names and all kinds of things. In this case, there is this one species, it's a winter wren is what it is, essentially, that's gotten over to Europe. So the Europeans already knew about these birds and they were actually part of the culture even before they started studying all the taxa that are actually in North and South America.
Oh, wow.
I always remember as a kid, there's an Irish folk song that the Clancy brothers used to play that I heard about when I was a kid, and it's called the Wren Song, where these kids would go out and actually kill a wren and then go around and raise money for the funeral on St. Stephen's Day. And it's like...
Well, the Chippewa name for them apparently translates into making a big noise for its size, which is hilarious
Really
too.
good name. Yeah.
I love words.
All right. Well, any more thoughts on the house wren, or should we close it out?
Yeah, let's close out the house wren.
All right.
And then we get on to some of those other houses down the road.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate the support. We do have one ask. If you don't mind leaving a review and rating in your podcast app, that would be greatly appreciated. We're trying to spread the word about our podcast, and rating us always helps. If you have a question for us, please reach out to podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com. All right, have a great week. Ooh, and just a quick update. Amanda and I have finally seen a house wren since recording this episode. We've seen a few, actually, so good for us. Love you all. Thanks.